Welcome, everybody, to the first Enhanced Conversation. My name is Jan-Martin Viada. I'm a journalist for education and research, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. The Enhanced Conversations are a new series of events hosted by Enhance, the European University of Technology Alliance, consisting of 7 universities in 6 European countries, plus 30 associates from cities and businesses to non-profit organizations and even museums. Enhance represents 228,000 students, 45,000 staff, and 83 faculties. But what is it about? Well, basically, it's about driving responsible societal transformation, empowering people to develop and use science and technology responsibly, and turn global challenges into opportunity. That's at least the claim. What it really means and why societal transformation and innovation through and with technology and science are so essential, that's what we are going to talk about this afternoon. More specifically, we will discuss the path to recover from COVID-19 and a sustainable future and the role of the European Universities of Technology to get there. But before we start, let me invite you to share your thoughts and questions to the panel via the chat. I'm going to pass on many of your questions and comments to our panelists later on, so we are sure we will have a lively discussion. And to make sure that I won't get lost because of all your comments, I'm happy to get help from Sindel Rexhausen from the Technical University Berlin. Thank you for that already, Sindel. And one more thing, there are 2 hashtags for the event. Please feel free to use them on the social media. Hashtag Enhance Conversations, 1 word, and Enhance Alliance, 1 word. All right, so let's get started. And for this, I give the floor to Professor Angela Ittel, the Vice President of the Technical University Berlin, one of the Enhance partners and our host tonight. She will tell us more about Enhance, about the Enhanced Conversation series, and about some of the questions that we are going to talk about tonight. And on a personal note, this is one of her very last events as Vice President, because Angela Ittel is President-elect of the Technical University of Braunschweig. Great to have you here, Angela. Sad to see you leave, but happy for Braunschweig. Angela Ittel, everybody, you have the floor.
Still doing the same mistake, not turning the microphone on, but thank you so much for welcoming me, and thank you so much for another congratulations. And that's the reason why it's such a special honor for me today to welcome you all here to the first Enhanced Conversation, because it is, and indeed, my very last event that I'm a part of at Technische Universität Berlin. And so I'm delighted to see all of you here and thankful that you'll join us for this first annual public event. So it will happen every year the network is conducting. And as most of you in this round know, Enhance is a university network of 7 major European research-intensive universities with a focus on science and technology. That was very important for us in the selection of the universities, that all universities put a major focus on not only developing innovation, technological innovation, but at the same time considering the society and also other disciplines within science and technology. And the network is funded by ERASMUS+, and its members are TU Berlin, as already mentioned, who took the lead in the network's proposal, along with the engaged contributions of 6 other universities, which I briefly name in alphabetical order. Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden, Norwegian University of Science and Technology, Politecnico di Milano in Italy, the RWTH in Aachen, Germany, Universitat Politecnica di Valencia in Spain, and Warsaw University of Technology. I really can't thank you all enough for coming together, working together, and to join us in this process to establish and also pursue common goals. With the Enhance Alliance, we stand at the beginning of a transformation process of the higher education era in Europe. And our goal is to create a new European academic space for the interaction between technological progress, society, and sustainability. The Alliance also wants to foster mobility among students and staff, create a common education pathway, and put sustainability at the core of all of our actions. And in light of these goals, we need public discussions like these and formats such as the enhanced conversations today to discuss how European universities can, and especially of course our network, can become drivers of sustainable innovation. And therefore, I'm especially happy to welcome today several people. I'm especially happy to welcome Professor Maya Göbel of the New Institute in Hamburg in Germany, and Professor Askia Thomasgaard of the NTU Energy Transition Initiative, who will, amongst others, provide input on resilient societies, the purpose of technological progress, and how multidisciplinarity and innovative research can help engage the public and the society. And we are also very honored to have Thomas Arnold, the advisor to the Developmental Goal Research and Innovation of the European Commission, participating today as a much appreciated guest for the upcoming public discussion, and also as a speaker for the internal discussion, which will take place later on today. In terms of sustainable COVID recovery, we need to also systematically integrate the social dimensions in our thinking and planning. And that's why I'm looking forward to Professor Michael Zadarsky input as the founder of the startup Wheelstare that uses technological progress to create a better society for disabled people. To start the discussion now, which I'm sure will lead us to new and inspiring insights, I would like to ask all of us to consider the following questions. What is our role as a university, and what is our role as a network in the COVID recovery? And how can we use the resources given by the European Union to create a better and more sustainable future for all of us? Or even, how can universities of technology in particular contribute to their immediate environment and on a European level to work towards a more sustainable society and also economy? And without further ado, I would like to give the word to Dima Yankova, a PhD student from the University of Valencia, to tell us more about how university networks such as our Enhanced Alliance can foster societal progress. I wish us, all of us, a wonderful event, and it's our first event and many more to come, and a very lively discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela Ittel. So let's get right into the conversation. We'll start with some input, as you already heard from Professor Maya Göbel, Director of Research at the New Institute. She's a political economist and important public voice for sustainable transformation of society, working at the intersection of economy, politics, and society. Her book, Unsere Welt neu denken, Thinking Our World in a New Way, published last year, right at the start of the COVID-19 crisis, has been on the German bestseller lists for months. From 2017 to 2020, she has been Secretary General of the German Advisory Council on Global Change. She's a member of the Club of Rome, the World Future Council, and a co-initiator of the Science for Future Network. And I could go on for much longer, but I think we would rather to hear from her directly. Humans are deeply socio-cultural creatures, she says. They are full of potential for learning and inventing. But what does it take to make them use that potential? What is life on Earth supposed to look like and feel? And how can technological progress and innovation help societies to bounce forward from this crisis, right into a development paradigm fit for the 21st century? Some of the questions Maya Göbel is going to address now. Resilient societies and the purpose of technological progress. Maya Göbel, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I was basically just thanking you all very, very much for this invitation, and especially on this initiative. I would really like to congratulate you, because one of the primary concerns I've had in recent years that there was a notion of juxtaposing sustainability and innovation. And it culminated in a discussion that we had in Germany that the innovation principle shouldn't be trumped by the precautionary principle. And I was thinking, whoa, now we really want to start talking about what we mean when we talk about innovation. And obviously we had a long discussion about how we can get out of sustainability problems through technological process. And this is really, really important. We've seen major leaps forward when we talk about more efficient use of our resources and alternative ways of communicating, for example, as we have today. And yet, in my function of the General Secretary of the Advisory Council on Global Change, we have, for example, written a big report, which took us almost 3 years, very interdisciplinary, to try to get a grip on the two big transformations that we basically have going on right now, the digital transformation and the sustainability transformation, and to see how we could, at best, use that powerful new toolkit, basically, of things that we're inventing to actually solve the problems that we know are long there, and we have long witnessed them, and they're really in the firm rubric of life on this planet. And this is what I've been trying to say on and on now. And I think the corona crisis has shown this. We really start talking about what is it that human existence is made of. It is humans and it is the planet, because we're biological beings. And so life on this planet really depends on the way that humans interact with what we've been given as ecosystems, and to make sure that their possibility of becoming very innovative in regenerating all the things like water circuits or a stable atmosphere or biodiversity, so that we still have pollination going on to make us have food available. So all of those fantastically developed ways of producing a wealth of natural capital for us, not to interfere with those too much, so that we don't risk losing them. And that's been a huge, I think, breakthrough in the recent years, that we've come from talking about sustainability as something that people said felt a bit like inhibiting. Oh, we have to get to grips with the limits of nature, have to cut back, have to clamp down, we have a big debate still about have to not live the good life anymore because that stupid planet is limited. And we've really come into understanding that what we're trying to do when we're marrying the social and the ecological as a progress ideal and try to invent everything that helps us harmonize those two developments, we're actually putting people's well-being at the core of the development paradigm, and which is what, for example, the preamble says from the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations that were adopted in 2015. It's about the well-being of people. We have it in Article 3 in the Lisbon Treaty. But that does mean, and we've only had this now with the German Verfassungsgericht, so our highest court, saying this does include the well-being of future generations. And there, obviously, we're straight into why some of the sustainability scholars are talking about the Anthropocene now, because we are many now on this planet, many people, which is a success criterion in itself, because deaths have been reduced, longevity has been become better, and we have really also had a huge progress in health and support to that. But now we are risking that particular health again by really intruding, that's been the coronavirus, into the territories of biodiversity, limiting the space where viruses can park in animals, so they'll jump over onto humans. So we've come back to understanding that this Anthropocene actually means that we are nature. And some discourses still go in the direction that we make nature, which is very interesting. And this is one of the aspects I want to talk about today, that the making of history is what humans are up and about to. But that means we should be cautious with the way that we look at the world and with the way that we think is possible, what is desirable, and what seems plausible when we look at different futures. And I find it really interesting to see how differently this is looked at. Some are saying, oh, great, humans make nature, let's go. And others are saying, oof, maybe we become a bit more humble and we understand that this is such a complex system that we might use our understanding to embed the solutions that humans make into that well-functioning organism. I have to disclose I'm more in that latter camp because I haven't seen human inventions to be able to copy ecosystems. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not saying it can't happen in the future, but as long as it becomes very complex, we did not have successful replications under a tarp or in a big tent that can create the same kind of life and persistence of life. And this is why I find today it is so important to come forward to saying, when we talk about recovery, when we talk about using also the corona crisis as a kind of wake-up moment to say, where do we want to go? And using a lot of money and also saying we have to orientate our research and development in a particular direction. Where do we want to build to? And at least we've seen that in Germany, there's a lot of building back. I think the COP now in the UK has the slogan, building back better, to say, how can we get out of climate change developments? But it still has a building back in it. And I think it is important to understand that looking at what worked before might be part of the problem, why we don't really solve the sustainability issues that we've known for so long. And the other element is I've just done a Google search on innovation, what comes up when you just put in the term innovation in image search. And it looks a lot like this. So innovation is very much associated with technological change. But we've seen a lot of research coming out saying that social and cultural innovations are really, really, really important when we think about what is that good life that people aspire to, because that's how they're going to consume, that's how they're going to invest, that's how they're going to desire living. So do we really want to just go that way, or do we want to see how a different way of that where we want to build to might look like? Because our images are guiding us. And this is one of the charts I've been using a lot when I was still facing the discourse where people say, oh, these soft issues, we can't really take ecological concerns so serious. It happened again after Corona, and they said, now we're really down with our economy. You can't come forward with those soft issues because now we have to focus to get back on jobs, get back on growing the economy. But this is the World Economy Forum's global risk reports. And when you see why it is important to understand that this is not a soft issue, but actually the basis of life in the future of biological beings like we are, I use this table to just say, look, and it's been in the last 10 years that the environmental issues have been moving up a lot. And on the international realm, on the UN level, there's a lot of discussion, especially when you talk to representatives from the global south, that don't necessarily use the term sustainable development, but disaster risk reduction strategies. There is this both. It's an aspiration, say, let's get to achieving those goals of sustainable development. There's also an avoidance aspect. And I think we have to also be clear, and Mr. Timmermans has been saying this, I think about last week or the week before, that the European continent is quite small for the amount of people that we have. We're very dependent on other parts of the world, both for the input into our industrial systems, but also for the exports. And giving some of the geopolitical, it's eased up now, but geopolitical dimensions recently, it also just really makes a lot of sense to say, let's go towards circularity, let's go towards decarbonization, and really make sure that we make the best of all the resources that we have, also within our territories, and also stop exporting all the waste into other parts of the world. And it was one of the most striking images for me, with the border shut now, that industry in Germany started thinking more about, oh, how can we recycle better? How can we get this going? Just because the waste was stuck on the border. So it couldn't get, in the German term is wegwerfen. So it's like throwing it away. Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, but where's away? Away tends to be an ocean, tends to be a soil, tends to be children's hands somewhere. So we started understanding that away is not gone, it's somewhere. And this allows for us to start thinking in systems much better. And this is where I think we really need to look at when we're talking about building sustainable and resilient futures. And now I want to go into a bit of work that I've been doing in my English publication, which has been a scientific book called The Great Mind Shift, where I was trying to answer these two questions, and where I came to look at the agency of why our ways of looking at the world are at the core of really driving a transformation into a purposeful direction. It was grappling with the tagline of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda in 17 goals, because it is transforming our world. And yet when I started going into transformation research, basically everyone said, we can't really say how to unfold a transformation in a complex system. It's always going to be some of the unintended behavior. There's always going to be uncertainty. There are always going to be tipping points where all of a sudden you're going to have much quicker developments as you would have anticipated. And so how do we still work towards that quality was one of the questions, even though if we don't know if it's going to be transformative change or after what period of time. But how is that intentionality possible? And then what is the key leverage point to unlock path dependencies of keeping us out of sustainable development, to think about how we can accelerate in comparison to the past when we're really saying the transformation should serve sustainable development. And this is why I've put forward an ontology from a social sciences point of view, very constructivist point of view, to say, how does everything that we call reality today emerge? And that's the fantastic history of human, well, ingenuity, basically, of putting things together. And it does start, from my point of view, with that sense-making actors, our intentionality of inventing something to achieve something. And that obviously is guided by our values, beliefs, knowledge, and worldviews. And this you can map when you go back historically, what kind of inventions were going hand in hand with different behavior, with aspirations. And obviously the Enlightenment phase, especially in the European context, was one area where both the way that we thought about things, including the nature-human relationship, about using fossil energies to build machines to really kind of subordinate nature and its capricious ways of dealing with providing or not providing, and that allowed for lots of development. But it is a different way of looking at the relationship between nature and humans than we might now look at when we look at it from a more complex systems point of view, or as some worldviews like indigenous worldviews have held, where it was much more the co-living between different types of life. But we end up creating those processes. And this is where I think the system thinking is so important, to look at the relationships, not only the elements. So also when we talked about digitalization, for example, to say it has to be looked at as a social technical system embedded in the planet. Because that was important to me as well, to say we can't really see that much of the data floating around. A lot of things are intangible to us, but still there's a hardware. There's something that needs to power the transmission of what we're doing right now. So there's an energy system there, and there's resources that are being built into the hardware, harvesting the kind of data so we can use it as information. So always to understand how those relationships are being built and how they come to something like we call socio-ecological technical systems that then have a life of their own. We can't just say, oh, we're just going to make the infrastructure go away by tomorrow because we rethink it. So the human freedom that I'm talking about is very patterned. We're embedded into the systems that we've built, into the things that we call normality. That used to be that way, that seems kind of normal. But we are also anticipating. So we have the ability to see how developments change, to challenge our ways of thinking about possibly the good life, for example. And this is why I find one of the terms or sentences by Karl Marx really summarizing it well, that humans make their own history, but under the circumstances transmitted from the past. And that's obviously where the transformation terminology comes in, because it does say we have to reconfigure a lot of those systems. And it can be a technological innovation, it can be a social innovation. At best, they kind of coalesce around really updating the ways we've been doing things. But who is doing the updating? Who is making the decision to create what kind of technology, to invent what kind of investment scheme, to say we could do this differently? That is us. And this is why I find it really important, even though some of the descriptions, when you talk about transformation, it's about the diffusion of knowledge, the cascading of innovations. So it's a very technical way of describing how things change. But in the end, it is people making choices in their everyday lives that is going to diffuse an idea or is going to make an innovation be applied. And this is how we can reclaim a bit where we want to go. And we can say, what counts as the way forward? So what have been part of that, in the question too, part of the past dependencies that made it so difficult for sustainable outcomes to emerge? And to me, it is part of the economics way of looking at what is desirable development. This is also a Google image search. And when you look at success, progress, development. The bottom terms are more logical because they're very economic terms anyway. But it's always been the same curve that we've been seeing in the Anthropocene. So more is always better, measured in money. But we don't always put the value of things in the money indicator correctly. And this means that we've created a lot of unsustainable development when you look at it now with the warning signs, whilst, for example, GDP has been growing the whole time. So the question is, how do we change the key performance indicators so that we come towards sustainable innovations? And that's basically my last examples, to really look at what are the incentives that we're using that are guiding our innovation. When you say we want to have a lot of wood production and you organize subsidy schemes in that direction, this is what likely forests are going to look in the future, because it's fast growing wood, monocultures, producing a lot of wood per square meter, but not very resilient towards climate change. When you say, let's pay for CO2 storage, like we do on the RED+ system, for example, it will be a lot of CO2 harvesting happening, but you're going to probably prioritize the kind of plants that are very good at this. It doesn't necessarily mean they fit into the biodiversity circuits where they're being built. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't suck up the rest of water. So we've seen a lot of planting trees in the wrong places. And this one, for example, might be the outcome if you say we're incentivizing for payments for ecosystem, or with payments for ecosystem services, which include water, which include a building up of the soil fertility. And this is why I think a lot of where we might want to look for innovation is in the incentive schemes and in the ways that we describe the goals where we want to go for then get innovating across the system. So change the mindset. What are the vision, goals, collective action? How do we really measure this well? Then go into what are the incentives? We're having a lot of discussions on this in the advisory council as well, that the people coming from digital saying we don't really have it in the ways that we are being asked, that we're getting grants for innovation, that this is part of what we should be looking at. We're still battling for social and cultural innovation to be married to the technological innovations. And then we can start looking at where do we actually go and how do emergent innovations feed off each other so we get towards the transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya Göppe. We are a little short on time, but I have one question for you from the audience. The question is, should technology and research focus on pushing the boundaries, discovering new possibilities, or rather on should they rather focus on educating people, finding practical applications for the current state of the art? And the question is even more explained a little bit. Are universities of technology the source of solutions for our challenges? Or do they create the challenges by enabling the students to push the boundaries without limited attention to their impact on society? So do we enable students actually to create challenges because they don't pay too much attention to their impact on society? So what are universities of technology there for? What do they do?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'll stop this so that we can actually talk to each other better. I can't speak for the universities, right? Because I don't know, I can only kind of mirror the kind of discussions I've witnessed here. And what I've heard, at least in also the kind of departments that I've been trained in, is that the whole Bologna reform, for example, has made it really tough for people still feel very free and experiment themselves on their way of doing things. So it's been much more that the curriculum has actually limited innovation and creativity to a certain degree by pushing the speed and by limiting what you can actually fit in. Mm-hmm. So compared with the time where I was studying, where I just had superfluous time go bartending, which was great as kind of balancing feedback loop to all that cognitive work. But I could also travel, go to different universities and really immerse in change processes, which is what I always did, to use my knowledge and to listen to what's helpful out there and to listen what's the real problems that people were facing. I was working on world trade in that area. What were they facing? What was their criticism? Why did they think that these kinds of rules were not helping them? So also there I looked at institutions as kind of enabling mechanisms, as human innovations to make us achieve things. So for me, this going back and forth between listening to practitioners, or we call them pioneers in transformation research, that try to bring out something different, and then go back to thinking about it and back to thinking what would help. and then look at where is the innovation actually. And so I also think that we need both. We need to talk about really where do we want to go and where are those hard limits. And it's really difficult still in the political discourse. It's really shied away from, and this is where I think science has a role to play, because they're all about relative improvements. But to say here's actually something that we shouldn't overstep. That was the court that said there is a particular budget of CO2 emissions, and we have to backcast from that and say all our innovations have to help us stay within that trajectory. And then it's both, I think, really becoming very good and living within those limits, but also to say, how do we want to live differently so that we can imagine a wholly different way, that it doesn't feel so much like limits anymore. And renewable energies are one of the areas where you can say we're maybe able to get out of them because we're completely jumping into a new system of providing for energy.
Maya Göppel, thank you very much. We'll see more of you later on. Thanks for now. So let's add yet another perspective. Asgeir Thomasgaard is a professor in managerial economics and optimization at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, another one of the 7 enhanced partners. His research focuses on energy transition strategies and energy policy. He is, among many other things, the director of FME Entrance, Norwegian Center for Energy Transition Strategies, and the NTNU Energy Transition Initiative. He's on the Climate Advisory Board for the Norwegian Minister of Climate and Environment. And again, there is so much more to say about him, but it's time for me to give Asgeir Thomasgaard the floor for his short presentation on multidisciplinary research at the intersection of technology and social sciences. So exactly where we just were. Please, Professor Thomasgaard, go ahead.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and being able to participate in this dialogue. And I have selected some ideas from one of these research centers that I'm involved in, the Norwegian Center for Energy Transition Strategies, and I'll try to focus on bringing this into the scope that you have defined in terms of how can universities of technology contribute, and where must technical and social innovations go hand in hand. And I'm focusing most on research, but I think this is as important when we discuss how to create the education system of the future. So I hope we can also come back to that during the panel discussions. And the research design of this research center is going on for the next 5-6 years. And in 2018, we tried to gather together in some roundtable discussions all the stakeholders that we are working with in public offices and industry, and we asked them some tricky questions related to what are the most important topics in your organization when you want to move towards a zero emission or climate neutral society. And this outer circle contains the topic areas that I chose. And remember, this is focusing on the energy transition, but we realized very quickly that the energy transition is not about transitioning the energy system. It's about how the energy system can help transitioning the rest of the society. And you look at energy production, infrastructures, prosumers, consumers, smart cities, industry, transport. And you realize that the future energy system is very much about the interfaces between technologies and the social sciences and innovation, if this is going to happen. Then next we asked these stakeholders, what are the most important drivers to manage this change in your organization? And sustainability naturally came out on the top. Digitalization as one of the enabling technologies, the need for radical innovation and disruption, and continued value creation as we do the transition to a zero emission society. And based on that, we try to put up an 8-year research program in transition of society. And I think that the multidisciplinary research that we find in the borders between technology and social sciences is essential to create transitions. And I think it's important that here says engage the public, but I think it's maybe even more important that the public takes ownership to the transition, and that you have the needed innovation potential to disrupt. And I think the way you look at innovation will change when you realize that the citizens take ownership of the transition processes as compared to the relative passive notion that we had 10 years ago, where the citizens would accept the transition. And I think that there's a lot of interesting thinking to do in these links, going from the passive accept via engagements to the citizens taking ownership to transitions. And if you look at the energy system and how it affects the rest of society, I think some of the examples of potential disruptions that we hope to see would be the need to manage to have negative emissions, how to withdraw CO2 from the atmosphere in not too many years ahead, how to move the whole wind industry out in the oceans using offshore wind, how to replace fossil fuels in heating industry and transport with clean fuels like hydrogen, possibly coming from natural gas using carbon capture and storage, but in any way you need the fuels to be clean. And for sure, these depend on technological development. They depend on new technological breakthroughs. But so many of the key success factors are social disruptions that need to happen in parallel. And I come back to that in my summarizing slide. But first, I would like to say something about how we designed this research program around the interfaces between different types of systems, and for sure between ecological systems, human systems, and technological systems. So one of the first areas that we focused on was the deep decarbonization and how that would move into societal change. And if you look at this, it means that the energy system will transition in order for transport to transition, in order for industry to transition, and in order for the buildings to become zero emission. And to manage this, you would need to understand the systems that involves both humans and technologies and the interfaces between those. And I think technological universities with strong social sciences is in a very good position to address these complex issues. And you can see it within a number of these areas that, for example, understanding why conflicts arise and how to solve these conflicts. And I think that's rooted in the increased understanding that these transitions will happen more smoothly when the humans take ownership, when the citizens take ownership to the transitions, are just not passive actors in the transition. And it's also related to the second research component, which is accelerating the transition. When we started this, we invited some of the leading innovation researchers around the world to a workshop in Trondheim, and we asked them, so how long does a radical innovation take? How long does a disruptive innovation take? And I said, well, historically, it's taken between 40 and 50 years. And that's quite depressive when you look at the climate challenge. If you would imagine that all the solutions that will help us to reach the zero-emission society were on researcher desks 20 to 30 years ago, that's really depressive. So you need to look at how could we accelerate these disruptive transitions. And our hypothesis is that this will happen in the interfaces between researchers, industry, public government, policymakers, and also the financial institutions that's going to fund this transition. And if you get all these groups together, maybe we can do this much, much faster. And of course, being an economist myself, it's difficult not to mention the energy markets in this. And I think that's, again, pointing to the consumers and the citizens. How can we get consumers to more actively participate in markets and make the markets more flexible? And then it comes to the whole transformation in terms of defining different transition pathways to the future. And this is one of the areas where you really see the need to understand both the social sciences, the technologies, and the environmental studies and environmental effects, what is happening. So what we're trying to do in Trondheim in this area, both in research and education, is to understand better the interfaces between what you could call the social technical perspective, the techno-economic perspective, and the environmental perspective in talking about future pathways. In far too many cases, pathways that describe the future or possible futures have only focused on one of these dimensions. And that will very rarely lead to credible implementation plans. And I think if you look at it from this perspective and combine that with demonstrations and innovation ecosystems, you could get credible energy transition strategies. So we call these pictures the key to the future, and it involves all these important dimensions with technologies, the social technical perspective, and the environmental perspective. And if you go back a little bit to these potential disruptions, which are some among many that I mentioned in the beginning, negative emissions, hydrogen, and offshore wind. Well, what is joint for all of these is that if you want to be successful in implementing those, you need the social engagement. You need to be able to handle conflicts of interests. You need to understand how to get the citizens to take ownership to these transition processes. And you need to leave this notion about acceptance. It's not the citizens that will accept technologies pushed upon them. It will be a pull for the technologies that are going to win, we think. You need disruptive business models because some of these old business models will be replaced. You need to build new markets and new market design. You need to have law and regulation that's suitable to adapt to this new situation and could also promote and speed up and accelerate these innovations. And I think our ability to do sustainable industrial scale-up is critical. If you look at the offshore wind industry, for example, I think at the moment there's approximately 1 gigawatt of offshore wind being built in the North Sea every year. Probably if you're going to be successful in the transition to a zero-emission society in Europe, probably that needs to be increased tenfold. And how can we do that and still be sustainable? And that's a very interesting question. It would need cross-border cooperations to facilitate such accelerated actions. And I think the whole innovation ecosystems need to a larger degree include what the previous speaker mentioned, also the social innovations and the understanding of how technological and social innovations go hand in hand. Yeah, so I think I'm closing there.
Thank you so much, Oscar, and we're looking forward to discussing further later on. We have one question that I would like to ask you right now, or to pose to you from the audience. And I think it's one of the core questions, actually. How can interdisciplinary collaboration be enabled within universities? Are the old structures, faculties, study programs, research chairs obsolete in order to make interdisciplinary collaboration work? Oscar.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I see, when I look at my own university, you can see the organizational structure. And that's, of course, a typical hierarchical structure and how to organize activities. If I look at how I work myself, it's very much more like a matrix across different faculties, across different departments, without looking at these borders that are created there in the organization. So for me, I would say that these old organization charts, they are, of course, useful when you're running budgets for an organization. They don't have much use when you are doing research in an organization.
So we can let them in place, but we should ignore them to some degree when it comes to working together. So for organization, for budget, it's good, but for contents, not so much.
When it comes to research, I don't think they count.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And thank you for sticking around for the panel. And it's also good to still have you here, Maja Göpel. We have a lot of input for now from the two of you. And so I would like to welcome two more panelists. Professor Michal Zidarski, founder of two startups aiming to provide mobility for all and to level the playing field for people with disabilities. The company's names are Wheelstare and MeWheel, and we'll learn more about in a minute. You are also professor of strategic management and international business at the University of Warsaw, and you are active as a researcher, consultant, speaker, and trainer supporting C-level executives in over 100 companies. Hello, Michael, I hope you can hear and see us.
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I also like to welcome Dima Yankova, your first-year PhD student at Ingenio, a joint research center of the Spanish National Research Council and the Polytechnic University of Valencia, which is also a member of Enhance. And very interesting for our discussion, as Angela Ittel has already mentioned, you are investigating the mechanisms of knowledge transfer within collaborative innovative networks such as Enhance and the mediating role that private firms and universities can play in this process. You hold a master's degree in engineering for sustainable development from Cambridge University, and it's really great to have you here, Dima.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, Michal, I would like to start with you. As I have mentioned, you are founder of the two startups. One of them is called Wheelstare, a good example, in my point of view, of combining technical and social aspects in order to innovate, Michal.
Yes, thank you very much, Jan Martin. And I think we'll have a film starting in a moment which will show what is Wheelstare doing. For us, sustainability and sustainable future means future which will be more accessible and more mobile. I think it's especially important given that pandemic crisis has made us less mobile. And we all started to understand and value how mobility for all is important for our societies to be more inclusive. There is about 1% of people who uses wheelchairs for their daily mobility, according to World Health Organization. And in developed countries, this ratio is closer to 2%. So each time we cross 100 people on the street of Berlin or Milano or Warsaw or other cities of the Enhanced Alliance, we should see someone on a wheelchair, and we do not. And I wondered if you know why. I mean, we knew that long before we started the project, the company, we founded company Wheelstare with my co-founder Jacek Kinkiner, who is engineer from Warsaw School of Technology, because our fathers suffered sclerosis multiplex and it made them using wheelchairs for many, many years. I lived on the 4th floor of a building with no lift, and my friend lived in a building which had a lift, but from the ground floor there were still 4 steps to the level of the street. And we both knew the problem from personal experience and believed that in the world where technology enables us to fly to Moon and Mars and do many interesting things, like on Maya Gopal's research, build skyscrapers, leaving 1% of population unable to exceed their houses or flats, it's simply not acceptable. So therefore we started the Wheelstare. We joined other great companies like Toyota or Honda or Stevo, who are dealing with challenges of accessibility, and we have our own technological solution.
Thank you so much, Michael. And by designing them, how did you take in the input of people who actually can make use of the Wheelstare? How did you make their experience work for your invention or for your innovation?
It is a very important part of our work. We started from the very beginning organizing users workshops. So we work with people with a disability who commute on wheelchairs, and we involve them in the design process. We challenge our assumptions and ideas. And actually, after the first workshop, I recall the crisis of my engineers who said, we did everything wrong, or almost everything wrong. But fortunately, after 2 or 3 days, they come up with creative solutions. And I think our solution has certain advantages to those which are currently proposed by other companies.
Mm-hmm. So when is it going to be on the market?
It should be on the market within a year and a half. So
it's really interesting, and also for people to experience that they don't have to be afraid. I can imagine that first time you use that, you are kind of afraid to use it because you might not be used to feeling safe in such a situation. And how do you observe that? How do you observe people using them the first time?
Indeed, I mean, we also did an experiential workshop for our engineers, and we all drive the stair climbers on stairs, and even I felt unsafe doing that for the first time. So we are working now to prepare a virtual reality experience so people can play with the Wheelstare on a very safe environment and to lower their psychological resistance. We know it's not grounded in a real risk, so it is safer actually to use technology than human assistance, but it exists, so we need to deal with it.
Thank you so much. It's a great example of combining technical and social innovation. And earlier on, Angela Ittel asked us that we should try to answer the question of what universities can do in this specific time we are in right now, and what Enhance alliances like Enhance can do to provide more solutions that are both technically sound and socially sound. And Dima Yankova, you work exactly in your research at this point, you work on mechanisms of knowledge transfer within collaborative networks, as I already said, at networks like Enhance. And how can that actually work? How can you bring those two together, those aspects together, social and technical innovation, and how can networks like Enhance help there in that regard? Dima.
Thank you, Mr. Viarda, for the introduction. Yeah, so my research focuses very much on the micromechanisms of both knowledge creation and knowledge transfer within localized collaborative innovation networks. And I'm going to try to provide some insight from my own research and sort of tie it back also to the arguments that the other panelists have made in the conversation so far. So I guess I'll just highlight two observations or two trends that I've seen in my own study of the literature. And one has to do with sort of who do we think are the main actors in a innovation network? And so we tend to typically imagine universities that of course play a very pivotal role because they're the drivers of research and innovation. And we think of private firms as well, like startups, SMEs, multinational corporations. But increasingly, we're seeing a recognition of the so-called non-commercial entities. So if we think of civil organizations, users associations, foundations, nonprofits, these associations are also very much part of the innovation process, but somehow they're missing from the map when we think of, or when we imagine a map of a local innovation network. And I think part of it has to do with just the empirical difficulties of tracing the contribution of non-commercial organizations, but there also has been some sort of theoretical gap in the literature as well. And the other point I wanted to highlight, which I think goes back to your question, is the need to embed local innovation networks into global ones. So no matter how successful or how innovative a local ecosystem may be at the current moment, it will ultimately run the risk of getting stuck or sort of experiencing stagnation and eventually decline if it fails to establish a sufficient number of linkages to external sources of novel knowledge and information. So here the connection to other networks and to sort of networks on a national or even international level become very important. And we've seen in the literature that universities tend to be those focal actors that have both the capacity, they have the incentive, and they also have the resources to establish these extra-regional linkages, and in a way they help to feed their local innovation ecosystem precisely with novel ideas, with novel knowledge that is non-redundant, and sometimes it's not available locally. And that is also the birthplace of breakthrough innovation. So that is one role in which universities can play very well. And they tend to, that's why we tend to think of them as focal actors in localized innovation networks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dima. How did you come up with this research topic as a PhD student? How did you get this idea to do research on this specific, very specific question?
Right, so I was interested in networks in general. I'm interested in how actors choose to collaborate with each other and how knowledge transfers. But also the ultimate goal of this research is to contribute to improving the European Union's smart specialization policies, which is sort of the cornerstone innovation policy right now across European regions, because it's the research that I'm doing is part of another alliance between European universities called POLIS, or Policies for Smart Specialization.
So that's really interesting. It will be really interesting to learn more about your results once they are in. Thank you so much. And let me just remind you again in the public audience or the virtual audience to tell us what you're interested in. What are your questions? What are your comments? Or what are your thoughts on what we are just hearing? And earlier on, we talked about the role of networks already. Angela mentioned that, Dima told about that. And Maya, I would like to ask you, what would you expect from a network like Enhance? What difference can it make in regard to the challenges that I had?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think drawing on the point that Dima was making, really have a good exchange. I think when we think about one or two trends that I find are a bit precarious, when we start thinking about how do we make sure that the knowledge is available and that we also innovate for the people that are most in need. And I think that was a really, really important point Mr. Tiarski made, because we have a lot of innovation push towards purchasing power, right? And a lot of emergency innovation push, like we saw with the vaccine. In that moment when we really need something, then it's possible to just really push and put the resources there and make things happen. But we want to be anticipatory, and we want to have a multiplicity of possible solutions. That for me is the definition of a resilient society. And we want to make sure that no one's left behind. That has to be our aspiration when we're talking about achieving anything like the Sustainable Development Goals. And so how do we cater with those two? And when we think about a push for economization, and in particular when we talk about, I've been working with the Climate Kick for a while with the Knowledge Innovation Centers from the EU, and I thought that was really great, but it was the knowledge triangle. So it was university, it was business, and it was political side. But who was not there was like the important fourth corner, which is civil society. And which is, how do you make sure that you're actually anticipating the needs before just looking at purchasing power? And when you look at how and who should be getting the information to be able to diffuse it, for me, the hackathons in Germany were one of the most amazing things when the Corona crisis hit. That was really people from everywhere just being brought together in a new way of designing a platform. Say, how do we make sure everybody gets food that can't go into supermarkets? How do we make sure that no one's being left alone at home? How do we make sure information about developments reaches those really short in time that are not necessarily digital natives? So, and that was a combination of social and cultural and just connections, etc., with digital. So for me, that was one of the examples when you're actually formulating a problem well, but you make sure that you're also identifying what does it mean to be successful in an innovation process. It does not mean that you're going to have a certain amount of market share. And that was our discussion in Climate Kick, that at the beginning I said, you can't really say that you've only been successful, because they were talking about having this knowledge triangle work towards bringing the climate solutions to market. And I said, you've got a huge problem because markets don't take them right now. Unless we have a carbon price, unless we're really changing the frameworks of markets, the sustainable products will have to kind of swim against the stream. And this is why I think the second element is to really say, let's redefine that innovation space. Let's redefine the purpose of what we're here for. Let's redefine what is a good innovation. And we've had, I think, encouraging papers from the high-tech platform, as it's called, starting out really from the technological point of view, and now saying, how does an innovation system should look like if it is to serve Sustainable Development Goals, including reformulating and pushing the government to say, you have to find better indicators of progress, so that we can measure against a totally different definition of progress, rather than saying whatever amount of patents, doesn't matter what is in the patents, doesn't matter if it inhibits for people to get access to vaccines or no, how the indicator is most patents, the indicators is most purchase, the indicators is most sales, the indicator is more economic growth. And it doesn't mean that the best, from the point of view of a full-fledged holistic assessment of sustainability, products are being sold. So we have to align those kind of definitions of where do we want to go and how to cascade them through our incentive schemes and our ways of measuring, are we on track?
Well, it's a wonderful perspective. It's also a wonderful perspective of a role that universities can play, also that networks of universities can play. But Oscar, I really wonder if this is the reality. When we look at most technical universities and what they talk, what researchers at technical universities think about, I would claim that they still mostly think about technological advance, that they think about technological progress. And well, when it comes to enhance, well, there are some smart people at the member universities who understood that if they want to gain access to European money, they also have to come up with something social in there. But I wonder if you look at the universities, the majority at the universities, if they think alike, or if there is still a more fundamental traditional approach there, Oscar, to be honest.
So I think that's a very relevant question. And when I look at my own research career, maybe the first 10 years, I focused on building highly specialized international networks within the topics that I was doing research on. basically stochastic optimization. Later on, I realized that it's impossible to build Horizon 2020 consortia on specialized topics like that. It's also impossible to solve extremely important problems for the world if you focus only on working with colleagues that know exactly the same thing as you do. So I focused for the next 10 years of my research to build highly multidisciplinary international networks where we could jointly go together and try to address some of these challenges that we have been mentioning here. I think if you look at the technical universities, they are very much the same. You could go across the traditional borders in faculties and departments and do exactly the same at home as in Europe in that respect, or globally. But I think it's important that you find motivation and energy in doing that. And I think it's important that you have organizations and corporations and networks like Enhance that could promote this kind of thinking and facilitate this kind of thinking, because it's not that easy. It took me many, many years to realize that I could not apply for European funding together with my best friends from stochastic optimization if I wanted to be successful in winning any Horizon 2020 proposals. After I realized that, also I felt that my research got much more impact, because then you get into groups of people that together can bring solutions to some of these very important challenges that we have already been addressing here today. So for me, being in a technical university opens fantastic opportunities, both in terms of doing the same kind of operations in our own university, but also using the contacts of my colleagues internationally to build this kind of interesting research cooperation. So I think in this respect, Enhance is a perfect example of something that could have a lot of impact if being successful in engaging the researchers.
Thank you so much, Michal. The same question to you. What role do social sciences play at Polish technical universities so far? How do they interact with the technical subjects? And is there a change around the corner, or is it more a little bit of lip service, like in many cases when you want to get additional funding money, which is fine? I mean, that's what universities also do.
No, we have increasingly joint initiatives, and I think, listening to previous panelists, Asger, I had a similar experience. I was once part of a cost network, actually on network science and statistical network science, and I know that networks, we all know, are created. They have certain property very often of the small world in which people are grouping around certain interest or certain divisions. I mean, more technical people stick together and more social scientists tend to stick together. I think the role of Enhance Alliance and similar initiatives is really to connect, to break the barriers, to bring people together and reinvent the society. And we need to reinvent the society after COVID. That's evident. I mean, we were experiencing times in which we learned to value being more social, more inclusive, more mobile, more accessible. And I think we can only reinvent it working together.
Thank you so much. There has been one question from the audience to Dima, and I would like to forward that to you. How do you create linkages between local and regions and or global networks, which is a really interesting point, because as we all know, at many of the partners of Enhance, there are very lively regional networks already going on there. Now there is this international Europe-wide network. How do you interlink them?
Right. That's a very good and very interesting question, and it actually gets to the core of it, right? Because establishing these sort of global or extra-regional linkages is, of course, a matter of resources and capacity, but sometimes what flows through them may be just business information or chit-chat, but not actual know-how and knowledge. But to make sure that once a linkage is established, what is really being exchanged between the different partners is knowledge. You need to also invest in strengthening the absorptive capacity of the local actors. So I would say that to be able to foster actual extra-regional linkages, you need to make sure that the local ecosystem is prepared to absorb the information, the knowledge that is flowing externally. So what it means that what this means is that the local actors have a sufficiently advanced knowledge base. So this comes, back to investing in local actors, but they also have the absorptive capacity to be able to interpret information and knowledge that is coming from outside sources. So partners who are working, they may be working on something similar, but using completely different technologies, or something that is still foreign for the local actors, and they need to be able to interpret that information, transcode it, and eventually diffuse it within their own local innovation ecosystem.
Thank you so much. So far, we have talked about establishing links between local partners or also international partners, but in order to be able to work with those partners, I think we have to talk about education as well. We have to talk about how to educate students. And this is something that we already talked about very briefly earlier on. How do we enable students not only to see the technology, but to realize the impact that technology has? And there's one question to you, Maya, from the audience that tackles that. How can education support this transformation? What would you wish for? There is less and less room for risk-taking in education than research. And talking about startups and funding, this is something that I'm observing too, that at German universities, and I wonder how that is in other countries, there is not so much study or research education programs on taking risks when you enter universities, Maya.
No, I think that it is a really important discourse, and what is a bit sad is how long it took, because we've been having a lot of also coming from the Sustainable Development Agenda. There's obviously this whole agenda on education for sustainable development. And only recently, the UNESCO has come forward, and it's very close when you look at the kind of skills that should be transmitted to people. So it's not only about the knowledge, because soon enough, we all have this thing in our hand and we know the details of a lot of things very quickly. So it really emphasizes on the abilities of people. And it's been merged with citizenship education, with peace education. So it really comes from the point of view, how can we enable people to deal with what's coming their end and to shape what they would like to see in the future. And what we've been doing in a report about digitalization and sustainable development, I looked at all the skills that are being demanded from the workforce, from the World Economic Forum, etc., to say this is what the competences of future workers have to be, or the people that can perform in that digital future. And you have so much overlap. It's really interesting when you look at it. It's dealing with complexity, having more emotional intelligence. Interestingly came out there. I think we look at the social media discourses recently, that might be a very good idea to start educating right now on. And multiplicity of perspectives, thinking in systems. So the only difference basically is between the two. One has a strong emphasis, obviously, about ICT knowledge, and I would say resilience. Digital resilience is a term that comes out of UNESCO and OECD that goes beyond just knowing how to apply things or program things, but also to understand what it does with me. So coming from what Asger was saying, a social technological point of view, again, to say, how do I feel differently when I'm very exposed? How is that thing when people just like and dislike me? What does that do to me psychologically? So it is a different space that we're entering, that we're creating. To how do we enable people to understand these spaces that are being built? But there is such an overlap that is, and I would really recommend the OECD's Learning Compass 2030 or 2030 Learning Compass, because they really brought it together in a very nice way. And obviously the OECD is huge because it's been the standard setting institution in education. And when you think about where did it emerge, so coming back to my points always about the purpose of what something is being created and which indicators have been searched for, the OECD in 1951 was trying to argue for investments from the public space into educating more and more people, because it wasn't normal then, in order for GDP to rise. That was the argument. So it was the purpose of bringing education to a lot of people was that it would benefit more GDP growth. And I've still been working, or been one of the experts consulting with the World Bank on their World Development Report 2019, when it was on the future of work. And they still had that metric that they said, we're going to tell governments in countries that are not investing a lot in public education that is going to benefit their GDP development in the future if they do, because it's good for people. And that was the indicator. And I was so shocked, don't die. have enough food when they go to school so that they can actually learn, and that they actually learn something in school. Those were the 3 primary indicators. And I thought, ooh, as a bit of leeway to go there for something where I would say that's an aspirational goal. And that's my last point, where the UNESCO is very clear on that education is a goal 4 in the Sustainable Development Goals. Everybody should have access to good education, but the type of education they have access to will enable them to become stewards of creating or living up to the whole SDGs. And if they don't get the access, they won't be the stewards. And if they don't get access to education that allows for them to see ecosystems, to see multiplicity, to understand how things are linked together, then they won't be able to build that kind of complex future.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask one question to Dima, by the way?
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd love to, because I'm struggling with it myself right now. I've been doing a lot of work in German. I've been working formally on the space where you're connecting with other researchers. So going to the transformation research conferences, etc., and applying for Horizon 2020s. And now, since I've chosen to say I'm going to try to communicate what we already know, I've been very much in German, and it's been hugely necessary to swap the language into German in order to be able to reach people that are not immersed in the research community. And now on social media, for example, a lot of people say, can't you just talk German? Can't you just talk normal? So there is a bit of a split there from 2 terms. A, who are you as a persona of a researcher when you're a communicator, and at the same time still want to be valued by your epistemic community as someone that also knows what she's talking about in terms of her field. And then how do you actually translate what's being, you have to publish in English if you want to be participating in the international discourse on sciences and research, but then you have to be very much in German or in the local language if you want to have an immersed transdisciplinary space where you're creating information or are gathering information that comes from that context and has meaning there. I find it difficult right now, so I'd love to hear your ideas.
That's a really great question, because this is a conflict that many researchers face that want to make also a difference society-wise. Dima, what's your answer?
To be honest, I don't have a straightforward answer. I think I completely understand the challenge that you're highlighting, and I think it's further complicated not only because of the translation that comes, with different languages, but also if you are working at the intersection of different disciplines, that adds further complexity into how you try to translate what you're doing with partners, perhaps beyond your local ecosystem, and then trying to explain to people who may have worked their entire life in a particular discipline your more interdisciplinary work or discussions and so on and so forth. I think it's incredibly difficult, and I don't have a solution, I guess, to it. But I think it's something that comes up often, even in the literature as well. And sadly, sometimes results are not perceived the way that they should be. They don't have the level of dissemination that they deserve because of these types of challenges that you highlight.
Thank you so much. And it's not only a question from my point of view of English or German or any other regional language. It's also a matter of scientific language and public language. Sometimes, at least in the German context, you can speak German as a researcher and people will still not understand you, because you have a very specific art to articulate yourself, to articulate yourself. And this is also something that we are really challenged in the German community, how to make science communication more approachable to people who don't talk science every day. Michal, I wonder if you work with people who and you want to use, you want to sell your products in the end. You have to talk and to work with people who are not in the science community, and to explain what you're doing and to work with them. How does that change the language that you speak as a researcher?
Well, of course. I mean, we are not really selling technology. We are selling ability for a person to share time with his or her friends when they need it, or to go with the family to a space which was not accessible before. So I don't think they really care about how we solve it technologically. They care about usability, about reliability, safety, and emotional change in life, and it really leads to social transformation as well, because if we have people with a disability being more accessible and more mobile and accessing spaces, I mean, in Paris there is only 4% of metro stations which are now currently accessible for people with disabilities. So if they start to commute in a large manner, this will change the whole society, not only their lives. So we try to speak the language of regular people.
Which, from my point of view, shows that a network like Enhance is also about science communication, and it's about talking about science, not only among researchers and companies or local organizations, but also about science communication with normal people. And this is something that is really important, I think. Oskar, there's one more question from the audience that I would like to put forward to you. When you say the public should transition from passive consumer to ownership, what current industrial examples of future research can universities promote here? And I would like to add to that question what we just talked about. If you want the public to go through this transition, how do you communicate this transition to the public?
And that's an excellent follow-up also from your side. A colleague at the Ecological department, Christian Klöckner, was managing an EU project together with economists and psychologists from Europe, and they did studies on how policymakers were shaping policy at the European level. And they found out that when policy was not working in terms of transitioning the energy system, the first thoughts that policymakers typically would be, well, either we need to give the general public more money to do what we want them to do, or we need to give them more information. And that's been the traditional way of looking at the public. And of course, that's affecting how you shape policy. What our study found out is that the public is much more driven by norms, culture, consumer preferences. And when you start realizing that, that would affect the way that you create new policy and also give you innovation in policy processes. And I think that's one of the takeaways to this question. I think if you look at new technologies that will come in, we have, of course, the electric vehicles in Norway. I think that's been highly efficient. The monetary subsidies that we have been used to get the market penetration for electric vehicles, it's been effective, at least in the way that it has created a lot of interest in buying and driving electric vehicles. Has it been efficient? Well, you can start looking at the cost, which is maybe 3,000 to 5,000 kroner per saved ton of CO2 in Norway. I think it has been efficient. If you look at the innovation processes, it has triggered in Europe and all over the world in terms of increasing the speed at which this technology has been implemented globally. But if you look at it from a local policy perspective, maybe if we are going to decarbonize the rest of the transport sector, like heavy freight, like maritime transport, we need to look at not only monetary incentives for the consumer, but also, again, trying to utilize the fact that more and more consumers are interested in participating in creating zero emission systems. I think there's a mix. I think you need to balance this, but I think the policies will be very different if you imagine that all technologies that will be implemented, either you need to give the consumer more information or more money, and they will do as we say. I don't think that's what drives the consumer. And you could mention hydrogen, you could mention battery electric vehicles, but I think for universities, I think to promote knowledge about these interfaces between technological system and human choice.
Mm-hmm.
Then policy is very important.
Thank you so much. I have two more questions, then we really have to wrap up this panel already. I can imagine that there are some researchers or people like engineers who feel that they are not really valued anymore, because everybody is just talking about the impact, the negative impact of their innovations, and everything is about social now, and just the plain technology is what excites them is not in the focus anymore. There was this one question earlier on that kind of expressed that from the audience. Is the best innovation maybe no innovative interference with nature at all? Just leave more nature to be nature. And Maya, this also comes back to something that you said earlier, that we all, being people, we make nature, we kind of alter nature. So is technology something bad for that we shouldn't just even get started? Because most of the times when people come up with new technology, it comes up with more challenges and we can't handle that. So I wonder, what's the role of technical universities in the future that and engineers that are just interested in being engineers, Maya?
Well, I think it's great to be interested in something and have a passion in something. So there's nothing at all ever wrong with it. And we've seen a lot of that, just wanting to find out eventually lead to something that no one ever anticipated would come from it. And that plays both ways, right? So we've had this discussion, obviously, with the nuclear bomb and the peaceful provision of energy, one of the prime examples there. So there is a moment of understanding how things work, and then how they're being put to use. That is something that is decided in society. And I think the incentive structures that have been mentioned by Asger are really, really important for that to understand. This is why one of the claims I've been using when I talked about the digitalization report is that every decision about the directionality of technological change is a pre-technological one, because it starts with the questions that I'm carrying inside. It starts with my aspirations of who I want to be. We're having a lot of discussion with startup communities, and they say this whole incentivizing of becoming a unicorn and having very quick money early out after 3 to 5 years, and that's why your ventures are successful. That means you will not be able to build a sustainable business model, because you can't look for the social and the environmental concerns if you're just going for financial returns as quickly as possible. So we have to look at, and I think that's my prime claim, to just say, what is the balanced view of where do we want to go? And that then means that it will maybe slow down something. It can also just mean that we're finding very different innovations that are non-technological to be much more helpful. And I think one of the important lessons were right now with the whole notion of the system relevant jobs that we have, and knowledge, skills and expertise by people that just know how to be with other human beings. And this is something where we come to a political economic point of view, because unfortunately it's not a good business model if people just stay really healthy, unless we all need a consultant now because we're too stupid to know what is good for us or haven't been given the education. And then with terms to the ecosystems, I find intriguing the new framework of regenerative, because it's not about going back to an original state wherever originality was in that state, but to say all systems are co-evoluting anyway. So there is a drive of change nevertheless. And then we can still cultivate something to try to, for example, bring biodiversity, water, CO2 sinks, etc., onto one and the same square meter again, do that purposefully and help it, but with some degree of humility.
Thank you so much. Michal, is it okay being at a technical university and just to be crazy about technology and nothing else nowadays?
Well, I think absolutely yes, and I would say that a history of mankind started maybe with using stones, right, as a tool, and first engineering projects were to shape them. I don't think we reasonably can advocate for getting to that stage or earlier, and certainly we need good technical solutions to make us more human, and I think robotics can make us more human, and we are just one example of many projects which lead towards that direction. I think we really need in a society also this incentive structure Maya was telling about, to focus on a deep tech that has a meaning for society. And these deep tech projects tend to take longer than 4 years or 3 years. They require a lot of commitment, a lot of passion, and also persistence and belief that you need to make this change through technology.
Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left, and I would like us to enter into a round of final statements, very brief statements, 1 minute each. If you have to give the enhanced network advice, or you have a wish to the enhanced network after our discussion, when it comes to the coming up years, what would be your wish or your advice to the network? I know that you have more or less connections to the network. I know that, but it's a huge network, so you can articulate your expectation, your wishes, your advice. You can say everything, but not longer than 1 minute, actually. Oscar, would you like to start?
Yes, I've been talking a lot about social sciences, but I'm a technology optimist myself, and I have to say it's probably a combination of bad decision models and technologies that's brought us into the problems we have today. I'm quite optimistic in terms of technologies, and better decisions can also take us out of the problems that we have created. And I would like to see enhance promoting these interfaces between technologies and good decisions by humans. How can we make sure that we make the right combinations of those in the years to come?
Thank you so much. Maya.
I am an advocate of biological systems supported by the things that we invent. So I would love for the agenda to be, let's put the human created solutions in the service of life, and then have very clear KPIs on it. So be really clear on that purpose and be really clear that this is how success is being defined here.
Thank you so much. Michael.
So my advice would be to continue working as a network, but also being open to other networks. So one network which I'm supporting in particular is WICT7, a network of enthusiasts and scientists from all over the world who try to solve the WICT problems of the world. And to learn more about this, please visit www.wict7.org. I think Enhance can contribute to that greatly.
Thank you so much. And Dima, you have the final statement, which is nothing that I didn't expect. I actually planned for that because you're the youngest on the panel. I would like to hear the future with the last statement.
Right. So I would say that to echo Miko's argument, it's important to think of a local network as being not this unit that exists in isolation, but as one that has the potential to connect to other national or international networks and to be even more embedded into those. And also to think of a social and technological innovation as going hand in hand. I think we can't think of them again as in silos and in isolation, and they're ultimately very much complementary to each other.
Thank you so much, Dima Yankova, Michael Zdarsky, Maya Göpel, and Oscar Thomasgaard for this actually very interesting, lively discussion on how we can make Enhance count and how we can make count what Enhance stands for, or will stand for. Thank you so much also in the virtual audience for your comments and for your questions. I'm looking forward to hearing more from Enhance. I'm looking forward to more Enhance conversations. And for now, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. And if you want to stay in touch with Enhance through its social media channels, you can do that. And it should be there should be some links now in the chat. I don't see them yet, but I'm sure that they will come up in a second. So stay connected, stay in touch. All the best to everybody, and looking forward to seeing you again in the context of Enhance or elsewhere. Thank you so much. Goodbye.